All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our August 29th TEA LEA Special Education webinar. We've got a couple topics today that I'll share with you. I do like to kind of start the webinars and remind people that, one, this is being recorded, and so within a couple days it will be posted to the website so that you can go back and watch the recording. The agendas there, documents that are shared today will also be posted along with the recording. Another note is we do not take live questions or chats. I know oftentimes people raise their hand, but any questions that you have, if you can please put them in the Q&A. We do collect those. We don't necessarily answer them directly, but it allows us to either provide some clarification in future webinars. It does help us with some of our FAQs. So any questions on the topics today, please make sure that you add them to the Q&A because we capture those at the end of the webinar. So, well, thank you. My name is Ana Mondragon, and I'm the Director of ESC and Stakeholder Supports. And so I've got two people with me today that are going to share information with you. And so we're going to start with Lori Merrill, who's here to talk about the SPPI clarification processes and share some resources. Thank you, Lori.
Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon. So, we're going to talk about State Performance Plan, the clarification process for indicators 11A, 11B, 12, and 13. For those of you that don't know me, I am Lori Merrill. I'm the Director of Monitoring, Review, and Support here at the agency, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Anna, can you confirm that you're seeing the presentation?
I am. It looks good.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so objectives of our time today, to make sure we understand the purpose of clarifications, that we go over the clarification participation decision making, any clarification requirements, the clarification submission procedures, and then next steps should your LEA be electing not to participate in clarifications. So to begin, the purpose of clarifications is that after that annual TSDS SPPI application close date, LEAs that certified less than 100% and by those submission dates have the opportunity to submit clarifications containing evidence of any pre-finding corrections for the indicators SPPI 11A, 11B, 12, and 13. For LEAs who certify less than 100%, you have two choices. You can participate in this clarifications process or do nothing. We'll get to the do nothing part towards the end of the presentation, but for now, we'll focus on should you want to engage. So when you're preparing for clarifications, first off, everyone should have received, if you are eligible to have a to participate in clarifications, meaning you submitted less than 100% and by the timelines for SPPI 11 and 12 TSDS data entry, as well as that SPPI TEAL application entry. You should have received something from our team yesterday indicating that the clarification window has opened. If you meet that criteria of less than 100% certified for one or more of the indicators, and you submitted your data by that timeline, and you did not receive anything, we're going to ask you to reach out to your ESC, and they will help you connect with our team. At the end, we also have our contact information. So if you want to just go ahead and touch base with the regional manager for your region, you can do that as well. But your ESC is already prepped and ready to support you in this process and connect you to the right manager and team on our division. But one thing to always make sure is that at the beginning of every school year and anytime there's a change is to update all that contact information in Ask TED. So oftentimes we're told, oh, I didn't receive your email. And when we cross-reference or cross-check the contact information, the person reaching out to us is not listed as the SPED contact. So that is where we get our contact information from, is Ask TED. So please make sure to verify that your information is correct. Check those spam folders. If you should have received an email and you didn't, check the spam folder. As much as we don't want to land in your spam, we know that filters are weird and things trigger different funneling systems. Let's see. If we do not hear back from you, we will assume that you're not engaging in clarifications. So that's a very important piece, is that if you wanted to participate in clarifications and you did not receive the email alerting you on to how to engage with us, please reach out to your ESC contact immediately so that you can get connected with us and we know that you are interested in the process. So in that participation decision making. Um, that clarification process is really our ability to go through any data that demonstrates pre-finding corrections or data system corrections. So on your screen, you are seeing what we view as the reasons for engaging in that clarification process. So for a pre-finding correction, those of you that saw the TAA that went out toward the end of July, you'll recognize this language. And here we're defining that pre-finding correction. So pre-finding correction may occur during the clarification process when the LEA has violated an IDEA requirement, but the TEA has not yet issued a finding. So that's where we're in right now. We don't issue our findings until October. So this is that time frame where documentation can be submitted to us that meets that meets these three criteria below. So if TEA, so if we can verify before issuing a finding that the LEA is correctly implementing the specific regulatory requirement, such as achieved 100% compliance, um, based on a review of updated data, um, evidence of policies and procedures, training, self-monitoring, has corrected each individual case of child-specific non-compliance, unless that child is no longer within the jurisdiction of the LEA, and has no existing corrective action under a TEA complaint or due process hearing decision, then we could pre-finding correct. So that is the purpose. So if you have students that, yes, we're out of compliance, but you have data that supports those three elements, um, that is how you'll engage with us for that pre-finding correction piece of the clarification process. Other reasons to engage are these data entry events. So maybe you've noticed that there's an absence report discrepancy. As we all know, attendance reporting absences and then the absence allowed within the evaluation timeline for SPP 11, they're not always aligned. Um, calendar corrections, data system errors. We have had lots of LEAs who aren't coding their transfer students using that transfer student code. So this is an opportunity that if you are looking through those students that are marked as non-compliance and you're like, oh, that student was a transfer student, that's why we were delayed, and you notice that you didn't use the correct code, this clarification process is for you. That's what we're hoping to catch, or any of those data entry events. And then obviously any documentation that you have that indicates your LEA data is actually compliant, because we all know systems have issues sometimes. So this is that opportunity during the clarification process to reach out to us and us engage in determining if it's a pre-finding correction or if it's a data entry event that we can correct prior to issuing our findings in October. So these requirements to engage in clarification. Every LEA who wants to participate in this clarification process will be submitting these 5 elements of documentation. So demonstration of revised procedures, training evidence, a self-monitoring plan, evidence of that student level correction, as well as your school calendars for the 2 school years that could cover this time frame of evaluation. So you had some rollover 22-23 evals that finalized in 23-24, and then obviously any 23-24 evaluations that completed their process during that time frame. So when we speak to things, this is just further explaining those elements, right? So there's child-specific corrections. That'll be demonstrated in the SPPI verification workbook. When you engage with us, letting us know that, yes, you want to participate, we send you this workbook. If you want to get a jump start, it's actually posted on our SPP indicator webpage as well underneath the clarification section. I will show you where to find that at the end of the presentation. But that is how you'll demonstrate child-specific correction. There's very specific cells of data that need to be completed. And then from there, we review that information and compare it to the information in TSDS. Procedures, for any of you that have ever engaged in a corrective action plan, you understand that we review, we revise, making sure that your procedures target whatever you determined was that root cause of non-compliance. Training artifacts, anything that you are doing to ensure that you're offering PD to ensure that the root cause of that non-compliance doesn't continue forward. And this can be that you've already done it. This can be that you're doing it. So just anything that you have to submit to us showing us that you are addressing this as part of the corrective action, then this is this is what we can consider during these clarifications. A self-monitoring plan for those indicators that were out of compliance, as well as the clarification attestation form that basically says that you understood, you corrected those instances of noncompliance, and that you are sustaining compliance following those instances. This is a screenshot of that student level correction workbook. Um, just an Excel workbook. It has a tab for 11A, a tab for 11B, a tab for 12, and a tab for 13, and then you just fill out the information accordingly. Please note that if we do not receive the student level correction, we cannot pre-finding clarify you, because we can't demonstrate that you corrected each instance of student level correction. So this is really that critical piece of information that allows us to process through this clarification process with you. It's important to note the root cause and then submit any evidence that the child-specific correction has been completed. We are not asking you at this time to upload student files for each of these students. You are just listing the student information and then answering the fields across the top for each form. Each tab will look slightly different because each indicator monitors or measures a slightly different aspect under the indicator. When it comes to those procedures, what we're really looking for is to ensure that in those revisions, you're addressing the root cause. So if what you determine as a team is that the reason for missing that, missing a timeline is due to the TSDS data upload, did you put a procedure in there that's going to ensure timely submissions? That's going to ensure checks and balances to prevent future delays and future missed timelines. So once you get that notification that the clarification window is open and you've chosen to engage, your TEA point of contact will share with you all the documents that are necessary for engaging and completing the clarification process. That documentation needs to be uploaded into the file transfer widget on the Ascend dashboard. I have some screens here coming up that will show you where and how to upload those documents. Um, if you have questions, you obviously reach out to us, but if we have questions or need additional information, we will reach out to you and request that information. And then we review. Based on the review, there are instances where that still doesn't allow us to pre-finding correct or to correct you to 100% during that clarification period. So participating in clarification process does not automatically guarantee that you're going to be resolved to compliant. LEAs who are determined to continue to still be non-compliant will receive a written notification in October from our department. All right, so clarification submission procedures. When you go into Ascend, please make sure that you select the 24-25 school year. That's important because that'll be the year we're engaging with, right? If you're determined that the non-compliance is going to continue forward and can't be clarified, then this will be where we start building that corrective action plan, and this is where we'll be pulling the data and the information from. So once you've selected the 24-25 school year, access your dashboard, scroll to the bottom, you'll see this file transfer. We call it a file transfer widget, but it's this file transfer section. And then you'll just begin to upload your documents. You can see that it says SPED supporting documentation. Select that, select your LEA using the drop-down box, and then choose the file that you want to be uploaded. We are asking that we apply certain naming conventions to the documents. Those of you that are engaging with us quite often in Ascend, you may be working with our team on SPP clarifications. You may still be closing out a corrective action plan, or you may have something that you're submitting for some other reason or finalizing an SSP element, and everything gets funneled through that same file transfer widget. So to the best of your abilities, using these naming conventions is a great way of ensuring that something isn't overlooked or buried in other data that's been uploaded. It's okay if the best that you get is 2024 SPP 11 clarification. We're okay. We'll know to look for those in those first few letters, those first few words in every upload. But if you can definitely just make sure that you're identifying it as the SPPI 11 clarifications process or 12 or 13, that'll just help us make sure that we don't overlook any element that you're submitting for review. So what to expect following the submission process. So once you've submitted that clarification, those clarification requirements via send, TEA will communicate receipt of those submissions. So we may send you a communication that says, hey, we've received these two things. Are you planning to submit additional documents? Or we've received all 5 of your documents. We'll make sure that you know that we have and what we have is matching what you submitted. Um, if we need additional information, we will outreach you on that as well. Um, Successful completion of the clarification process requires all requested submissions be uploaded in Ascend during our submission window. So that began yesterday with the notification kickoff, and it runs till September 12th. Anything received after close of business on the 12th of September will not be reviewed. So that's very important. Um, we have several LEAs that will reach out afterward, be like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that there was a closing date. So September 12th is our closing date. That allows us to then dig into that data that you've submitted um, and work with our data team to correct any levels of child-centered, child-specific noncompliance, get those numbers, and then make those determinations accurately. So let's say your LEA is choosing not to participate in clarification. Totally fine. You can do one of two things. You can verify that non-compliance, but just by replying to the email you received from us saying, thank you so much. At this time, we are choosing not to engage. Um, we highly suggest that because we have a system built in for us that if we haven't heard from your LEA at all by a certain date, we outreach you again. This just prevents email clutter. So if you know you don't want to participate, just reply back to us and say, hey, I don't want to participate. Thank you so much. And we'll note that we've heard from you and we won't ask you again in a few days. You can also choose to do nothing, which is fine. The risk on that is that we always get worried that are you choosing to truly do nothing or did the email not make its way to you? So, but again, your choice on how you want to handle it, but you can do either way. You can just verify with an email replying back saying, I'm not going to engage or do nothing. And then when we send you that second contact, after that, we just know that if you're still not responding, you're electing not to participate. We do make our compliance findings based on the data that is available in Ascend at the end of that clarification window. So everything needs to be uploaded into Ascend. If you run into an issue with Ascend, just reach out to that reviewer that has made contact with you. We can provide assistance and guidance and figure out other ways to get the information to Ascend if necessary. All right. Some resources. These are found on the SPP indicators page. It's the big forward-facing one that has all the tiles for all the indicators, and then down at the very bottom is a little subsection for clarifications. And this is just a helpful one-pager that gives you the timeline, like the overview process, so you can kind of see. So we're right here in this middle part. We're in this SPPI clarification window, again, closing in September 12th. And then from there, you'll see that we engage in our review so that we can get those notifications out by October. And those notifications usually go out mid to end October, just to kind of have a timeline in mind. These are the items that we request to be submitted in Ascend, and then just some helpful contact information if you're running into issues. We've received lots of emails today about, oh, hey, how do I know which indicators or which students? The best and the most accurate way to go in is to go in for SPP 11 and 12 is to go into the TSDS application. There's a view reports screen. On those reports, there's one report that tells you the number of student consents that were submitted, how many were compliant, and then what was the non-compliance for 11A and the non-compliance for 11B. That's your surefire way to know, did you or did you not meet compliance for 11A and 11B? Same thing for 11. Same thing for SPPI 12. There's a screen in there that shows you how many students did not meet compliance for indicator 12. There's also student level reports on that screen that allow you to see every student and then just pay attention to the headers and the columns, because in those column headers, it'll tell you, especially for 11A and 11B, maybe they were compliant for 11A, but not compliant for 11B. That'll help you build those student lists in that verification workbook. For SPP 13, you can just go back into that teal application. On the district admin screen, you can actually see a section that'll list all the campuses in your LEA. You'll see compliant or non-compliant. You can select the campus number and it'll take you to the list of the students and it'll show you which student was determined non-compliant based on your submission. So that's the best and most accurate way, because that's the data we're pulling from. So if you're going into those screens and you're not seeing what's supported or seeing something different, then that's a helpful conversation for us as well. So always check there to get that information. Again, the verification workbook, you'll receive that in an email if you email us and let us know that you want to engage. It's also posted on our website and we have it uploaded in Ascend. So there's 3 spaces where you can find this resource. Hopefully everyone has access to Ascend, but if you don't, we provided some instructions on how to gather access or how to gain access. This presentation has been submitted to post to the website, so hopefully it'll be up, if not by tomorrow, beginning of next week. And that way you guys will have all the links and the content that's included here. But there are step-by-step directions on how to get that access to Ascend. A couple pointers. Make sure you're applying for access using your LEA email. We do kick it back if we just see a generic Gmail or something that doesn't relate to an LEA. If you are a member of an SSA and you're applying for multiple LEAs, just be sure to note somewhere that yes, your LEA name is different than the name that you're applying for, but that's because you're a member of the same SSA. It just helps us and it prevents any further delays in getting that approved. Another resource that we provided this year is kind of a step-by-step guidance on how and what to submit for this clarification process. So again, page 1 really walks through what the purpose is of clarification. And that is to allow that opportunity for pre-finding correction. This document also provides just some guiding questions for you as LEAs to walk through. And it provides some help text too, right? So if you've answered yes to all of these, you probably have all the data you need to participate in clarifications. If you answered no to these, then you may not have all the data that's necessary. We are never going to say yes or no, you should or shouldn't participate in clarifications, but we did want to provide some information that allows you to kind of go through what you have, what the expectations are, what we're allowed to do during this process, just to help you guys make an informed decision. And then there's additional resources. These are all found on that SPPI page. Some of these are on the actual indicators themselves, and others are on the larger overview page. But a lot of these have, like on the SPPI 11 page, there's information on how to read those reports that I mentioned earlier. So if you do go into TSDS and you're trying to decipher what the reports mean, what the columns mean, there's a key there that can kind of help you understand what the column headers are addressing. And then again, just some more contact information. You can reach out to us on the review and support team for anything related to the clarification process. If you are running into issues with TSDS, your best and most important first call is to connect with your TSDS team member either in your LEA or reach out to that ESC TSDS champion. If something's happening with TSDS, all of us are going to end up going to the same spot to find out from TSDS what's going on. And then for questions related to SPPI 13 in that SPP TEAL application, you can email the spp@tea.texas.gov email if you're running into any glitches or access issues with getting into that SPP 13 TEAL app. So that was the bulk of what I wanted to share information-wise. These are the contacts that I mentioned at the beginning. Obviously, best case is just to reply to that email that you got because we're all tracking them. and we can see the responses pretty quick. We have a team that's really focused in monitoring those responses. But if you are really concerned that you haven't received the email or have additional questions or need a little bit more guidance, feel free to reach out to the manager that's associated with your region. And we're happy to help you. You can always reach out to the review and support at tea.texas.gov box. We all monitor that. So all of us eyes on it all day, so we can get you back a response pretty quick as well. So that was that for the presentation. I did just want to show you guys where you can find all of this. So if you go to TEA and you go to our state performance plan indicators page, all the way down, so you see all the tiles for each indicator, all the way down is the information on clarification process. And here you can see this is the one pager, that clarification process one pager that kind of tells you the time frame overview, as well as what resources need to be submitted, those considerations, those kind of guiding questions for you and your LEA as you prepare to submit data, call that data to see, do we have what's necessary to engage in clarifications, and then that verifications workbook, as well as the attestation form. All of these will be sent back to you when you reply, yes, I'd like to engage. But if you want to get a jump start, you have access to them as well. This slide deck that I just went over, it'll post as the top bullet once it goes through the approval process. So I am going to stop sharing because that is everything I wanted to cover today.
Thank you, Lori. And I'll remind folks as well that the presentation will also be posted next to the recording for the webinar. So it'll be in two places. So
Absolutely.
I do see a few people raising their hands. So if I can just remind you to put any of your questions in the Q&A, we don't answer them live. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, guys.
Next on our agenda, Kristen has joined us for covering a little bit, and you were with us at the last meeting, and we even said, or at the last webinar, we said maybe we'll come back when all of that stuff is in place on August 22nd. So Kristen's back with us.
Yes. Let me see if I can share here. All right. So you can see that, right?
Yes, it looks
Okay.
good.
All right. So yes, so we had a kind of a second set of rules, commissioner rule amendments that were effective on August 22nd. And so because this is a fairly large-ish packet of rules, we decided we were asked to go ahead and do kind of a volume 2 of the back to school updates. So this particular document is posted there in your webinar information for today for August 29th. So you're welcome to visit that. It is linked there. And again, so this is just kind of an update to that original one that we issued earlier in the month, describing some other rule changes, just to give you kind of a heads up of some of the rule amendments in this round of edits. So obviously don't want you to use this completely as a substitute for those rules. Make sure you read the rules in their entirety, but just wanted to kind of point out some of the kind of substantive changes or sort of important things to know with those changes. So first thing in our first rule update at 19 TAC 89.1001, this is kind of a general rules, sort of the first in the series in Chapter 89 Commissioner Rules around special education that is defined as scope and applicability. There was an existing provision in that rule about residential facilities and the school district responsibilities to sort of engage in child find activities. The change there is essentially just clarifying, what we mean by residential facility in that rule, since it wasn't specifically defined, and also increases the child find activities for a minimum of twice a year rather than once a year. So the instructional arrangements and settings rule, and that is at 19 TAC 89.1005. So this one had some pretty significant revisions. Honestly, the revisions are really more to clarify and align with what the student attendance accounting handbook either already said or meant, but didn't, specifically wasn't exactly clear. So what we tried to do was kind of so the commissioner has rulemaking authority for instructional arrangements in the education code in chapter 48 of the education code at 48102. And so within the context of those instructional arrangements that are listed in the education code, the commissioner has rulemaking authority through that. And so, most districts are, obviously familiar with the student attendance accounting handbook, which kind of gives detail under the actual codes for instructional arrangements. And then, that aligns with, of course, this particular rule at 89.1005. So the attempt was really to try to take questions that we've had over the years to try and clarify and align with each other. I will note to those of you in the district world, when the final version of the student attendance accounting handbook comes out, with with all hope and hope and prayers, it should all line up with this rule. So we did receive a public comment during the comment period of the student attendance accounting handbook that says, hey, so we know that there are some rule amendments pending for special ed in this area. Can you make sure the final version essentially aligns? So when you do get the final version of the SAW, it should align with 89.1005. And so I will say we're working, obviously kind of our TSDS PEMS data elements and kind of descriptions around there. Those are typically kind of amended like on a schedule. And so there may be some hiccups that we have to work out throughout the year. And so we will do our best to continue to, provide assistance to you all around that, around those areas. So, continue to ask, your service centers are always a great place to first ask, and they, obviously can send us questions as they receive them too. Okay, so with 89.1005, just kind of clarifying instructional day, it needs to be commensurate to that of students without disabilities. We all know that can only be modified when determined necessary by the admission review and dismissal or ARD committee. So just some clarifications in that wording. In the mainstream instructional arrangement, there is a statement that was added that just, monitoring student progress in and of itself is not a special education service. That's a statement that has been in the student attendance accounting handbook for a long time, not necessarily in this rule. So we aligned there. The homebound instructional arrangement, this was changed to just kind of clarify the, instances of when this instructional arrangement might be used. So there is the provision where it can be used for medical reasons. So this is when a student is expected to incur full day absences from school for a minimum of 4 weeks. The weeks do not need to be consecutive. Prior rule referred to, I think they didn't need to be consecutive if it was addressed in policy. Again, since this is really going to be an ARD committee decision, that's going to be up to the kind of medical documentation and the ARD committee discussions. So that rationale or the requirement to be in policy is not there anymore. Of course, this is for medical reasons, which could include psychological disorders. And what the ARD committee, of course, will do is they will review medical documentation from a physician, and they'll make that decision about whether this instructional arrangement is required for the provision of FAPE, your free appropriate public education. So they'll look at, obviously the medical documentation will look at kind of what are the periods of confinement to the home, what are the, what are those, what kind of encompasses those full day absences. There's also the allowance for home-based instruction, in this case, what we refer to as the homebound instructional arrangement for children who are 3 through 5, when that's determined appropriate by the ARD committee. So that is not subject to the medical documentation. This was already in the current rule, but just, kind of a little bit buried. Or the former rule, I guess I should say. But we just kind of, tried to make sure that those instances were listed. And then in the education code, there's a provision in Chapter 29 about school districts who only provide education in these particular hospital settings. And so that would be the instructional code that those districts would use. The hospital class instructional arrangement just clarified really. Again, so this is around services provided by district personnel at a hospital or other medical facility or at a residential care and treatment facility. So if the student resides in a residential care and treatment facility but receives services at a campus, that's not considered this instructional arrangement. And so that's the residential care and treatment, and we'll go through that here in a second. Speech therapy. So if the student has received speech therapy and the IEP indicates that a special ed teacher is involved in the implementation of the student's IEP, but there's no indication of how that teacher is providing the services, then this is clarifying, okay, no, the student is in the speech therapy setting. So there needs to be, that's essentially just kind of a reminder to our ARD committees that with speech, since that can be a standalone service, we need to make sure that if there's a special ed teacher involved, we need to document what actual specially designed instruction they are providing. And then also to align with what's been in the SAW for a long time is if a student receives speech therapy and another related service, so no other instructional service, then they would be considered in the speech therapy setting. So that's the difference in this particular instructional arrangement, is that speech therapy can be considered an instructional service on its own. So essentially that's how we get to the kind of speech, what's traditionally called speech only kids. All right, then resource room and self-contained, that was just clarified to kind of align with those descriptions in the student attendance accounting handbook about obviously the percentages of the school day that the student is in those settings. The off-home campus instructional arrangement, we clarified this you'll also see here in another rule that we'll reference. We've received a lot of questions over the years about this particular instructional arrangement was called off-home campus. And then we also got questions about a rule in relation to what was formerly called like off-campus programs. And so it got a lot of kind of confusion on those particular areas. And so we renamed that other rule to be, essentially your non-public or non-district operated day placements, which was really what I was describing. So the off-home campus is students in South Texas or Wyndham, which was already the case. It's also used for a student who's one of a group of students from one or more districts who are served in a single location in another district when FAPE is not available in the sending district. And then there's a couple of situations around kind of preparation for kind of that post-secondary and competitive integrated employment and independent living around transition goals. These bullets are essentially conditional on whether it's operated by a district or not. So those particular statements there are, here's one reason or one area where it's operated by a district, the other is not operated by a district. Then if it's provided or it's used for a student in a facility not operated by a school district with instruction provided by district personnel. So this might be, for example, maybe kind of a day rehabilitation center that the child is, or the student is attending. And so that could be an instance where you would use this. And then used for a student in a self-contained program at a separate campus operated by the district that provides special ed, only special ed and related services. So that's was already in there. Non-public day school, just clarified that this refers back to our 89-10-94, which is just what I was referring to. Vocational adjustment class is another instructional arrangement that's listed in the education code. So this is clarified to be that, you know, it's really a support program around those students who are placed on a job, a paid or unpaid position. All right, so residential care and treatment facility, that is essentially if these students are residing in a residential care and treatment facility, but they weren't placed there by the ARD committee, and the parent does not reside in the district that's actually providing these services, that's when you would use that particular instructional arrangement code. And then we have our children who are birthed through age 2, who have visual impairments, who are deaf or hard of hearing or are deaf blind. Those instructional arrangements could be coded as home-based instruction or center-based instruction, which is described in the student attendance accounting handbook. And those would, home-based would essentially have the same funding formula as homebound, and center-based would be a self-contained. Okay, 89-10-75. This is around general program requirements and local district procedures. So what was added here was, of course, which of course is always the expectation and requirement, but it just adds an explicit statement that districts have to adopt and develop policies, procedures, programs, and practices that are consistent with the states around compliance with IDEA, which is a requirement in the federal law. And then we did add a existing statutory requirement about your transition and employment designee about completing the required training by the commissioner and being able to communicate those transition requirements. The interventions and sanctions rule at 19 TAC 89-10-76, primarily updating cross-references of statute and just kind of aligning with the responsibilities of TEA under the IDEA federal regulations. In 89-10-85, this is around referral for the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired and Texas School for the Deaf. So in that particular rule, it referenced a resident school district. And so, you know, basically saying that the resident school district is just, you know, if they place the student at the TSBVI or TSD, then they are responsible to just make sure that FAPE is provided by those schools. We had some questions over the years about, well, does resident school district also mean a charter school if that student was enrolled in a charter school at the time of placement? And so the answer to that is yes. And then a kind of a corresponding rule on transportation of those students is essentially, again, the resident school district is responsible for the students getting transportation at the beginning and end of those school terms and for regularly scheduled holidays. These last two are about the non-public residential placements as well as your non-public day placements. And so 89-10-92 is about your non-public residential placement and the contracting of those entities. And so in that particular rule, kind of a main kind of point at the beginning is to just really kind of clarify what is the definition of these kinds of programs and, you know, a non-public residential program provider. And then in 89-10-94, this is where I was referring to that it previously was referred to as an off-campus program. But we changed the title of that and the reference to those programs as non-district operated or non-public and non-district operated day placements. Oh, let me go over that next part. So a non-public or non-district operated day program includes the provision of those services to one or more students in a facility not operated by the school district. So basically it's clarifying that an entity that contracts with a school district for the provision of FAPE in this circumstance is subject to the rule, even if the entity is providing the services at a facility owned by the district. So the key piece is whether or not the district is operating the program or not. And then these last kind of additions or just, kind of important things I wanted to note, these are actually included in both of those rules, obviously, is that there are some specific statements about just ensuring the school districts need to make sure that they're ensuring that the program provider staff who will be working with a particular student who's placed there have been subject to the same criminal background checks as public school employees, and that provider has developed policies around, the kind of protection of students with disabilities, because they do have, of course, they need to make sure and have the same rights in those placements as other public school students with disabilities. And so that is inclusive of kind of your emergency behavioral interventions. And then in terms of the contracting piece, there is, just a TEA has to, kind of go through a process of approval of those programs, and adding just essentially, again, kind of TEA can place conditions on the providers. And if TEA doesn't approve or does not reapprove or withdraws an approval, then a school district needs to remove students from that facility. And then TEA has authority to conduct announced and unannounced visits. And then the last kind of addition to that process, just to ensure kind of the efficiency, is that contracts need to not begin prior to August 1st and then not extend past July 31st. And then amendments will be submitted to TEA. So lots of detail in those particular rules. These are just kind of some of the additions or clarifications. So I just wanted to point those out. So I said all that really quickly, but hopefully the document is helpful. This is, from here on, as I've mentioned several times, we had kind of a lot of rules sort of in the process of being amended. The rest of them from here on, I don't think we have more than 3 at a time. So they should be not as substantial moving forward. And of course, whatever the next updates are, we'll come back and explain those, but just wanted to make sure you had kind of a tool to help you understand this latest round of effective amendments. So that is my time.
Well, thank you, Kristen. And I know both this and volume 1 have been helpful for exactly what you said. Lots was happening on this particular time. So hopefully in the future, we won't need as many supported documents because there won't be as many changes. So I know that there was some questions that came in, and then there was some questions that came in from the previous one. What we might do is just kind of make sure we put those together, and then maybe we'll hop back on, and I'll let ESCs know if we hop back on to address some of those questions, or if there's just maybe some supplemental document. But we'll make sure to communicate any supplemental Q&As that go out through the service center. So thank you everyone for your time and submitting your questions. We appreciate it. And thank you, Kristen, for joining us today.
Absolutely.